Something happened at the Cleveland Browns' voluntary veteran minicamp this week that deserves more serious analytical attention than most of the coverage around it has provided. Shedeur Sanders was leading the first group. Watson was working with the third unit. Gabriel was somewhere in between. The Browns haven't made any formal announcement about depth chart hierarchy. They've been deliberate and consistent in their refusal to do so. But rep distribution at a voluntary session communicates organizational direction in a language that every professional football person in that building reads fluently. First-team reps are not ceremonial. They are not administrative. They are the coaching staff's daily visible expression of who they trust, who the system is being built around, and whose development is the organizational priority. The minicamp footage didn't accidentally show Shedeur leading the first group. It showed exactly what Todd Monken has been signaling through his language all offseason. The evaluation has a direction, and that direction has been visible in practice structure before it becomes official in any public statement. Let me walk through the specific details of what the minicamp showed, because I want to be precise rather than over-interpreting footage that carries built-in ambiguity. The video coming out of that session documented Shedeur going first in warm-up sequences, leading the initial group through early reps, with Watson running with the third unit behind him. There is a counter-argument worth engaging honestly. At a veteran minicamp, rep ordering might simply reflect seniority, with Watson as the established veteran getting the first formal look before the younger players rotate in. That reading is possible in isolation, but it doesn't hold up when you place it next to what Monken has said explicitly about how competition in this quarterback room is going to work. He has said, with no diplomatic softening, that reps will not be divided equally. He has said the evaluation will be conducted daily through performance. In that context, with a head coach who has publicly pre-committed to unequal rep distribution based on competitive merit, the groupings visible at voluntary minicamp aren't random traditional ordering. They're the early visible output of an evaluation process that has already been running for weeks and is already producing conclusions. The consistency of what national media voices covering Cleveland have been saying about this situation is striking when you examine it across multiple sources over multiple weeks. The availability argument is the one that keeps surfacing, and it's the right argument precisely because it's grounded in documented reality rather than projection or preference. Watson has been genuinely, substantively, repeatedly unavailable at the most consequential level for the better part of 3 seasons. The initial Achilles tear in Week 7 of 2024, the re-tear during recovery, the complete absence from the 2025 season, the slow, uncertain return to physical clearance that has produced optimistic workout footage but has not produced the kind of sustained competitive football evaluation that a coaching staff can use to build a projection. An Achilles injury is not the same as a hamstring or a knee sprain. The kinetic chain that produces quarterback performance, the ability to drive off your back foot on a throw, load your hips through the release point, reset your weight distribution in a compressed pocket, move laterally to extend a play without advertising your direction, runs directly through the Achilles and the ankle and the complex muscular structure surrounding them. 2 injuries to the same tendon, compounding the recovery timeline and the uncertainty around what returns when the recovery is declared complete, creates a level of physical ambiguity that no coaching staff can responsibly ignore when allocating organizational resources. Monken is not being reckless or unfair to Watson by pointing his evaluation in a different direction. He is responding honestly to a physical reality that the footage from a single voluntary minicamp cannot resolve. Gabriel has his own availability history that the competition framing around him sometimes obscures. A concussion, a shoulder injury. Gabriel's situation is complicated further by the reported trade demand and the organizational signals suggesting Cleveland has moved past him in their evaluation. His presence in the minicamp doesn't change those underlying realities. What Shedeur offers in contrast to both situations is the one thing a coaching staff making daily competitive evaluations actually needs: consistent, observable presence. He has been in that building, every day, not in the reluctant, contractually obligated sense. In the genuine, this is the most important competition of my professional life sense that coaches and veterans inside a locker room can feel the difference of. That presence has been accumulating as competitive currency since the off-season program began, and the minicamp rep distribution reflects what that accumulation has produced. The Carson Beck interview story is worth spending real time on because of what the reaction to it reveals about where the serious Cleveland observers are in their thinking about this roster. The Browns used one of their 30 allotted pre-draft interview slots on Beck, and the immediate response from people covering the team most closely was pointed frustration, not because Beck isn't a legitimate prospect, but because the message it sends when you have 3 quarterbacks already in a complicated room and you're spending limited interview capital on a 4th creates understandable anxiety about organizational direction. The counter-argument is that Monken has a prior professional relationship with Beck from their overlapping time at Georgia, and the interview may have been a professional courtesy rather than genuine organizational interest in adding competitive depth at the position. That reading is probably accurate, and it probably shouldn't generate the level of concern it generated in certain corners of the Cleveland media landscape. But the reaction itself is informative. It tells you how sensitized the people closest to this situation have become to any signal that suggests the organization might muddy the quarterback waters again rather than committing fully to the direction the minicamp footage and the locker room dynamics are pointing. Cleveland has a documented history of using its organizational capacity to create competition where clarity was available and needed, and every possible repetition of that pattern generates legitimate alarm. The draft priority question is where I think the organizational commitment to Shedeur gets tested most concretely, and the local voices making the offensive weapons argument are making the right analytical case. The Browns finished 30th in offense last season, not average, not slightly below expectation. 30th. You cannot be 30th in offense and then use your 2 first-round picks, 6 and 24, on positions that don't directly address the conditions under which your quarterback is being asked to develop. The argument for explosive offensive weapons isn't just analytically correct. It's the logical extension of saying you actually believe in Shedeur Sanders as your franchise quarterback rather than just nominating him for the role, while leaving the infrastructure around him unchanged from the environment that produced a 30th-ranked offense. Receivers who force defensive coverage distribution decisions, who make safeties choose between protecting against the deep ball and protecting against intermediate routes, creating the conflicted coverages that Todd Monken's Baltimore-influenced offensive philosophy is specifically designed to exploit. An offensive line that gives the quarterback consistent protection rather than requiring him to process on the run while absorbing hits from a compromised pocket. Tight ends and backs whose receiving capability extends what the offense can threaten vertically and after the catch. These are not luxury investments. They are the foundational conditions for offensive function, and the draft is the moment when the organization demonstrates whether it's operationally committed to building around Shedeur or just verbally committed while letting the infrastructure remain inadequate. The Tom Montgomery detail is one of the most interesting specific pieces of information that came out of the pre-draft period, and I want to give it the attention I think it deserves without overinterpreting it. Montgomery, a wide receiver who had a meeting with the Browns ahead of the draft, was asked what it would mean to be drafted by Cleveland. His answer named Shedeur Sanders specifically, not generically, not whoever wins the competition or the quarterback the Browns start. He said Shadur Sanders would be throwing him the football. That specific answer, delivered on the record by someone who had just been inside an actual Browns organizational conversation, is a different kind of signal than anything that comes from inference and analysis of public statements. Prospects who meet with NFL front offices and coaching staffs get real information in those rooms. They get a sense of organizational direction that press conferences are specifically designed to obscure. When someone comes out of that meeting and names a specific quarterback in the present tense as the person who would be throwing him the ball, he's reflecting something that was communicated inside that conversation. It's a single data point from a single source, and I'm not treating it as definitive, but it came from inside an actual organizational conversation rather than from outside observation, and that gives it a texture that public statement analysis cannot match. Let me think through the Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward dimension of this as well, because I've addressed their public statements in previous analysis, but the minicamp context adds something new to how they should be understood. Garrett said at Super Bowl Radio Row that Shedeur is what they're looking at as the guy, and that he gets first service. Ward said he would obviously get first service, and that the opportunity is clearly his. Both statements were delivered with the careful diplomatic qualification that the job has to be earned through competition. Neither one was a flat endorsement that bypassed the formal process. But both were statements of organizational directional belief from the most credible voices in that locker room, delivered in public settings where the safer, more neutral language was available and not chosen. When you add those statements to the minicamp rep distribution that has Shedeur leading the first group, to the scouts' tape evaluation that validated his production under adverse conditions, to the organizational silence from Barry and Munkin that is more accurately read as strategic conclusion building than genuine uncertainty, the convergence of evidence is remarkable. Every observable signal is pointing in the same direction. The only thing missing is the formal, public, unambiguous declaration that the Browns have been reluctant to make. That reluctance has costs that I think the organization may be underestimating. The absence of official clarity creates permission for dynamics that damage the developmental environment a young quarterback needs during this critical window. A veteran receiver who isn't certain which quarterback he's building chemistry with brings less urgency to voluntary sessions with any specific player. A lineman whose organizational commitment to a specific quarterback's protection hasn't been formally reinforced brings slightly less intensity to certain assignment details. Coaches designing scheme installations who haven't received unambiguous direction about whose physical profile they're optimizing for make slightly more conservative choices in every concept. None of these individual costs is catastrophic, but accumulated across an offseason and extended into training camp, they produce an offense that operates with less than its full available belief behind it. And in professional football, the difference between an offense operating with complete collective belief and one operating with incomplete collective belief is not theoretical. It shows up in third down conversion rates. It shows up in late game execution. It shows up in December when the margin between playoff qualification and elimination is measured in single plays. The Watson financial dimension remains the organizational weight underneath everything, and it requires direct acknowledgement rather than dismissal. $46 million in cap space in 2026, a contract that no other franchise in the league has been willing to absorb despite what appear to have been genuine trade efforts. Dead money implications that make any release scenario financially painful regardless of timing. Watson is on the organizational books, and the pressure that creates is real, even when the football logic points decisively in a different direction. The sunk cost fallacy is the specific cognitive trap this situation creates. The impulse to extract more performance from an investment that has already been made, to justify the expenditure by giving it more operational weight than the current evidence supports. The correct analytical response to that impulse is the same regardless of how large the investment was. The money is already committed. It returns in exactly $0, regardless of whether Watson starts or doesn't start, regardless of how many first-team reps he receives during OTAs, regardless of how the official competition is framed. The only variable that produces genuinely different outcomes for the franchise is which decision gives Cleveland the best path forward from here. And when you examine that question without the emotional weight of the financial commitment distorting the analysis, the minicamp footage already showed you what the honest answer looks like. Shedeur Sanders led the first group. That's where the evaluation is right now. The formal announcement will come when the organization is ready to make it. But the practice structure is already reflecting the conclusion. The locker room already knows. The rep distribution already shows it. The prospect conversations are apparently already reflecting it. The national media voices and the local voices and the independent tape evaluations are all pointing in the same direction. The minicamp this week wasn't dramatic. It wasn't controversial. It was a voluntary session where quarterbacks threw the ball and coaches watched. But in the specific language of NFL practice structure, it said something very clear to everyone inside that building who knows how to read it. The Cleveland Browns have a quarterback. His name is Shedeur Sanders, and the organizational machinery is already quietly building itself around that reality, whether or not the formal declaration has arrived yet. What comes next? The draft, where pick 6 and pick 24 get deployed, and the organizational investment in offensive infrastructure around Shadur gets made or doesn't get made, is the test of whether the commitment visible in the minicamp rep distribution is going to be backed by the resource allocation that actually makes it mean something. You can run Shadur with the first group in voluntary sessions all spring and still undercut his development in September by leaving him without the receiving weapons and the protection infrastructure that 33rd in offense requires. The minicamp showed organizational direction. The draft will show organizational commitment. And the gap between those two things, between saying you believe in a quarterback and actually building around him, is where Cleveland's most important decisions of the 2026 offseason are still waiting to be made.